It's great to see you all. I love doing the health chats because it gives me the opportunity to talk to people that I find very interesting, and I hope you do too. Tonight I think will be super interesting, not only because of the environment within which we're working at the moment, but also things that have been in the news as well, which we can all do without, but nevertheless they're challenges and we must deal with them. So tonight it's about the third sector, it's about the charity sector, predominantly it's about the Red Cross, and who better to tell us all about that than the Chief Executive of the British Red Cross, my guest, Michael Adams. Michael, thank you very much for joining us. I mean, you were in the NHS at one time, weren't you?
I did for my sins.
You had a proper job, yeah. Okay. Well, okay, let's go back. Where did it all start for you? You've got a bit of a burr in your accent, but you're not West Country.
No, I'm from Newcastle.
Are you really?
I'm a
you've got rid of that
frustrated magpie supporter.
You've got rid of that speech impediment.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry to anybody watching in Newcastle. Yeah. Very nice to see you all in Newcastle. Yeah. So what happened? Would you go to uni? What happened? What was home like? Brothers, sisters?
Yeah, no. Very nice family. I got a younger brother. My mother was a GP and did family planning clinics and worked in the University Health Service in Newcastle, in fact. And yeah, I studied economics at Sheffield University, and then I did a master's at Oxford in economics.
Masters in economics? Blimey. What a waste of a
career. No, the funny thing is, you're so right, actually. Honestly, you spend so much time on mathematical models that have no reflection of no relationship to the real world.
Yeah. I'm just going to move that because otherwise you're going to put it off. Yeah. So, and what did you do then? Did you put an advert in saying, does anybody want to...
That's right. I'm an overdeveloped economist. No, I worked as a management consultant with what was then Coopers & Lybrand, now PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Yes.
And spent a total of 6 years there, including doing bits of NHS work. In fact, the first, one of the early assignments I worked on was about the planning of cancer treatment services in what was then North East Thames Regional Health Authority. Yeah, a real insight into...
Well, that was interesting because our cancer, we thought our cancer services were good, didn't we? And it wasn't until we did the comparison with the Eurostat data that we found that actually that's not the case. I think that came as a surprise to everybody.
But also what was interesting then, this was in the days before NICE, and actually part of the reason for the commissioning of that study was that fundamentally, and forgive clinicians in the room, please forgive me, but actually in North East Thames what they used to do was give people lots of little shots of radiotherapy. But in other parts of the country, you get a few big shots of radiotherapy, and one was a lot cheaper than the other, to be frank, and they needed to rationalise services. But what was shocking at the time was the lack of, to somebody new to this, the lack of consistency of practice or accepted good practice to guide healthcare for people with the same condition.
Yeah, I remember when NICE came in, there was a huge row really about whether or not clinicians would be told what to do and they lose their clinical freedom, and there was a big row with GlaxoSmithKline over a Relenza, I think it was, wasn't it, which was a flu thing. You stuffed up your router if you thought you were going to get flu in a fortnight. So it was a useless product. That I think I'm assuming, I hope Glaxo aren't watching because they want to get sued. But I'm sure it's a jolly fine product if used appropriately, and other cures are available. So you rationalising of the cancer stuff, that was before the cancer czar. The cancer czar came a bit later on.
I think so, yeah. All of that.
Mike Richards came later.
Yes,
yeah.
much later. No, much later. This is the. I know I look very young, but this is the second half of the 80s.
Yes.
The great thing about that part of my career in management consultancy was the range of things I could work on. At that time, you could move from, airport planning to health, to go and look at the economics of a water project in southern Africa, to, there's a whole range of stuff that you could actually go and look at and learn very, very quickly about how a whole range of sectors worked, and that was incredibly exciting.
I mean, I think management consultants get a bad rap, don't they? I mean, everybody kind of dismisses the big six and it's a fix, and they come in and they charge the earth and all the rest of it. Do you think we get value from consultants?
Well, I'll tell you what I do think, actually. I think the key to getting value from a consultant is to be a good client. It's all about actually the client having some sense of what it is they're looking for. Too often, I've seen it even in our own organisation at times, is that you see it a lot though as a consultant, is people they just hire a consultant. They don't actually know what it is they're trying to look at and therefore how to make best use of the advice and support they're actually getting. So sometimes you have failed consultancy assignments that are really to do with client failure, but actually going to get described as the consultant who's failed to deliver a solution or whatever it is.
Well, I mean, I think that's probably true, really, in the Lansley reforms above all others. I mean, they had a cull of managers and then introduced this unbelievably complex, labyrinthine change to the platform of healthcare. And then we all wondered why the bill for the big six went through the roof, because there weren't the people around to do the job. That's the other thing, isn't it? Having enough staff.
Well, I mean, there's two main reasons to hire consultants. One is you don't have lots, but three. One, you don't have the people. Secondly, you need the advice. Or thirdly, you know what you should be doing, but you actually need somebody else to give you the advice in order to convince the other stakeholders, the board, or whoever it is that about what needs to be done.
Yeah. So from there, is that when you came into the NHS?
No. What happened then is that during that time I spent a couple of years overseas as well. I worked in Swaziland as an economist in the Department of Economic Planning. Then went back into management consultancy. So it's all within that 6-year period.
But just Swaziland, where's Swaziland?
Swaziland is Southern Africa.
Oh, I know it's in Africa, but which bit of Africa?
Southern Africa. It's squeezed in between South Africa and Mozambique.
Oh, right. So that's there. So it's about 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A bit further.
What's it like?
It was. I had an absolute blast there. So I worked in the Department of Economic Planning, advising government on, again, infrastructure projects, that kind of thing, water projects, electricity, dams, that kind of thing, and housing.
How does a country like that survive? Because it doesn't have any industry. Does it export much?
No, I mean those. Lesotho, Swaziland, and to some extent Botswana, although they've got diamonds, which kind of helps. Actually rely on migrant labour going into South Africa traditionally, working in the mines, and then remittances are a huge part of the income.
Right.
But then what they were also was, which was a fascinating time, because again it was pre the release of Mandela. Actually, they were also tax havens for businesses, northern businesses that wanted to do business in Southern Africa to supply the South African market, but would be able to invest. We had one of the biggest tax earners in Swaziland was actually the Coca-Cola factory, because it was so profitable, and then they bottled it and then flogged it into South Africa, which is it's within the customs union.
Like the Liechtenstein of Africa. How interesting.
Yeah, it was an absolutely fascinating time.
And there's a lot of poverty though, isn't there?
Yeah, poverty, HIV. There was conflict in Mozambique, huge influx of refugees, the beginnings of the HIV crisis, a kind of mixed political system of, on the one hand, apparently elected parliament, but on the other hand, a king who actually owned a lot of the land. And one of my claims to fame is I taught the king of Swaziland economics for 6 months. Not to much effect, I'm afraid. He'd failed his O levels at Royal Shrewsbury School, and then he came back.
Tough school.
No, exactly. And I was asked to try and teach him some economics in the rest of my role.
And it took 6 months to...
Well, we then nationalised land and bought aircraft and got lots of wives, so always didn't work.
Sounds good to me. It's my life. Yeah, okay. So, and then what did you do then?
Sorry, after that, I just realised that I just wasn't enjoying it. It was getting more and more technical, the work I was doing, and I genuinely wanted to do something I believed in. And I just saw a job advertised with the Red Cross to get involved in setting up longer-term development partnerships with the British Red Cross. This was my first period with the British Red Cross, and that's what I did. I went and set up long-term programs. I took a huge pay cut. I mean, I get very well paid now, but I took a huge pay cut at that time to go and do that because I just wanted to do something I believed in.
And where did you do it?
Well, based out of London, but then we built partnerships, some of which we've still got actually with places, Bangladesh Red Crescent, the Ethiopian Red Cross, Lesotho Red Cross, trying to help them to think, because the way the Red Cross works is there's 190 Red Cross and Red Crescent societies around the world, 17 million volunteers, we're all signed up to the same set of principles around humanity, impartiality and neutrality. So the key, and even if you look at Syria now, we may get to that, Syrian Arab Red Crescent is the main provider of support in Syria to the people who need help. So they are local institutions with their own volunteer base. So the challenge is, how do you help them to have the capacity to be able to respond when the emergencies come along?
So you strengthen their
Exactly.
indigenous management. Okay, fine. And then at what point did you go and work with the PCT? That must have been about
so I spent
90s somewhere?
Yeah, so I spent 10 years with the British Red Cross the first time around, did a mixture of, did the international work for 5 years, and then I did some UK work for another 5 years, and then just personal circumstances, to be honest. We had young kids, and I realised that we wanted to live outside London for a period, and I saw a job advertised in The Guardian with one of the new primary care trusts. And one of the interesting things about the voluntary sector or charity sector is that while we're a large organisation, actually there aren't that many large charities. In fact, there's a big tail of small charities. And I just thought, well, actually, think of the career development opportunities there must be in the NHS with all these large organisations, 150 organisations or more the size of the British Red Cross. So applied for a job, knew very little about health. I believed in the NHS, as I'm sure we all do. But applied for a job as a director of planning, which then morphed into a director of commissioning in a primary care trust in Gloucestershire, which we'd also never been to. And so had 3 years in a primary care trust trying to make sense of that world.
There weren't primary care trusts in the beginning, were
No, there were
there?
groups.
The primary care groups, weren't they? And then we realised they were all too dinky-do and too small.
And they still were.
Had to merge, and even 150 was probably too small.
Yeah, I mean, and I think actually just at that point there were 300 primary care trusts, and so that was in the late. When would that be? So that would be in the 90s.
Mid to late 90s.
Yeah, and every job I've done, I've just learned so much. I'm still learning now, and that's what I love about the roles I play. I learned so much in that time in the primary care trust about, and came to admire some of the leaders within it, within the NHS, about how they get things done in this sort of very difficult environment. But also I learned a lot about power dynamics, because we were in a dysfunctional health and social care economy. There were 3 primary care trusts. We were the one that was completely broke. You had an all-powerful hospital trust that became a foundation trust.
Which one was that?
Gloucestershire Hospital Trust.
Oh, yes.
We would be called down to the Strategic Health Authority for our ritual meeting every week to explain why we hadn't introduced car parking charges or something. But also about all of that stuff around demand management and trying to get those schemes to work, but in a context in which, which we still can see it at times, but about where so much is dependent on the goodwill of the leaders within the health and social care economy to want to do the right thing, by people and patients,
such an interesting
and by each other.
Because over the years I've interviewed hundreds of leaders really in the health service, and at every iteration that you get, I was around for the Griffiths report, which is a really long time ago, but people who were good during the Griffiths years were good in the Thatcher years, and the people who were good in the Thatcher years were good in the Blair years. There's always, Sam Etherington, you must know.
Yeah.
Sam has got a GP surgery in the East End, and it's a GP surgery in the middle of a garden centre with a coffee shop, somewhere, he's in there.
Yeah.
But he's made a success of everything. Andrew Morris, Frimley Park, has made a success of various iterations of healthcare in hospitals. And you see it all the time. There are some people who just do it, aren't they?
Yeah.
But what is that? How do they do that?
Well, I think, there is an irony, because during that time, I took part in a King's Fund leadership development CEO development program with people that, including Mel Pickup, who you met last week or whenever it was.
Yeah.
And what I came to do is to really admire the leaders who were able to get things done. And there's something, and there's so much, leadership development going on for NHS leaders in emotional intelligence, political intelligence, about how to operate, without authority, systems leadership, all of that stuff. And yet, when it comes to it, it's somehow not valued, and you need people who can hold on to the end point, which is the person. And they may not even be a patient yet. Actually, that's the point. They may not be an NHS patient, other than their GP practice or whatever. But that actually you hold on to the person that you're trying, whose life, who wants agency, the fashionable word of the moment, who wants to be able to choose how they live their life. And obviously, if they get sick, that's a problem. And actually, it's how the leaders in those health systems really operate together, focused around that person while negotiating all of their individual budget constraints.
But it's as seldom holistic as that, is it? I mean, the systems, certainly PCGs offered this sort of new nirvana, didn't they, of, you know, local people commissioning local services from local blah blah, you know, local. And then we had Lansley's no decision about me without me. The focus, we've always tried to do that. I mean, Florence Nightingale wrote about the importance of the person and agency, but somehow or other we get defeated. But is it the size, do you think, that just defeats us?
Well, I think there is something about size, which is this inevitable tension between localness and economies of scale.
Yeah. Let me just roll. Sorry to interrupt you, but let me roll you back a bit. I mean, PCTs really were there for commissioning writ large, weren't they? Contracting. That was the big thing.
It was contracting.
And the logic behind that was that, like the high street, competition improves quality and gets a handle on cost. And in any other part of the economy, that works. And we thought we could do it. It started in the Thatcher reforms and then got multiplied. And we thought we could do it in healthcare, but it didn't work. And I don't know why it didn't work, because it defeats normal business logic. As a big knob of economics, you know about these things.
I don't think there was ever a big knob of economics, I'm certainly not now. But it's the reason. I think that it's simple. It works when you're commissioning. It can work when you're commissioning hip replacements. But if 70% of bed days are taken up by people with multiple conditions, it doesn't work. And even the BMJ was writing a few weeks ago about how the NHS has become too specialised. And you used to have a shoulder specialist. Yeah. Now you have someone who's a specialist in a bit of a shoulder.
Yeah, Mancunian Medic, I think there was. He wrote that. I read it. It was
and
really interesting.
Really interesting. And that's so you think about what that means for the person. Nobody's, all of these handoffs between specialists, and yet I just think if you step back and you were designing this from scratch, you simply wouldn't do it the way we do it at the moment. You'd start to root it in the actual challenge we're facing, which is that that people start off well. It's how we keep them well. How do you nip things in the bud? How do you stop loneliness becoming a chronic problem, which means they go to their GP or whatever? If they fall, how do you get them back on their feet again quickly? You work it up all of the way from actually what is necessary to keep them well and independent. And you then acknowledge that with an ageing population, there are more and more people with multiple conditions, which is the drive of the cost within the system.
But maybe you put your finger right there, because if again we draw the lessons of economics and business, because I think there's a reasonable parallel between business and public services, because they have to be governed in a business-like way. In a business, you segment your business, don't you? So, for example, Topshop, you know what you're going to get in Topshop. You know what the customers will look like, vaguely their age bracket, their disposable income. You know who you're dealing with, and your Marks and Spencers. You're dealing with whoever still goes to Marks and Spencers. So you know who your market is. In the NHS, of course, we open the front door, and Topshop, Marks and Spencers, everybody comes, and we can't segment that. Our business, and so we can't do the tailoring of the service.
No, and it isn't interesting that the flash stores like Harvey Nicks or whatever. Now they have expert shoppers, don't they? Who accompany because they want you to buy lots of things.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't need a pair of jeans, you need a T-shirt, you need a coat, you need whatever. And actually, that's what a lot of people who are using lots of stuff in the NHS need, isn't it? They need a whole bunch of different inputs.
Well, we've had the personal trainer thing, which didn't work. But the segmenting thing really interests me. If you look at Australia, for example, they've got the Department for Health and Ageing. So they've carved out ageing and they offer completely different services. I mean, it is crazy to send an ambulance for a little old lady with a UTI, park her in A&E, the most confusing, mind-boggling place you can think of, and then put her in bed for a couple of days. Social services can't get her home, and then wonder why she can't walk.
No, and she's losing 5% of muscle strength every day.
Yeah, I mean, you and I can sit and talk about it. It's just we go back to PCT days. I suppose really PCTs were more interested, weren't they, in volumes? How could they get all their hip operations done less 5%, that kind of thing.
And I don't think we were really doing commissioning. Actually, what we were doing was we were doing some pathway work, which was worthy in itself, not just worthy, it was useful in itself. And we were doing a lot of contracting, trying to, but of course the other market failure is at the end of the day, notwithstanding a bit of choice, we were dealing fundamentally with one supplier, which is the dominant hospital trust. So yes, a few people in the south of the patch could go down to Swindon, but actually you're dealing with a dominant supplier, and actually that's not the way in which to...
Well, the processes are interesting. I mean, I live in Surrey, and I've got fabulous Frimley Park, I've got Ashford and St Peters, I've got Royal Surrey, and blah, blah. So it doesn't matter where, I can nip around, and that's fine. But of course, even from the time when I was the chairman of the Health Authority, we wanted to close one of them because there wasn't enough money in the health economy to keep them all open, and they're still having an argy-bargy about it now, all those years later. Yes. So you do get those two conflicting pressures. So here we are, you're at the fag end of your time with the PCT then, got fed up with that, commissioning wasn't working. Why did you leave? A better job offer, or did you just get hacked off of it?
I just realised, the key thing I found frustrating was, well, firstly, I hadn't understood power dynamics, how power worked within the NHS, which is around the clinical colleges, and then around the hospital trust, and then around the regional health authority. And I'd naively thought that being on the board of primary care trust, you'd have loads of choice and discretion. How wrong could I be? So that whole sense of...
the whole system was designed so you
no, exactly. I remember the moment when they're actually trying to roll out the new national IT, all that Richard Granger stuff, national IT service. And
now be careful, because I'm the only person left in Britain who's a big fan of Richard Granger.
Well, the fascinating thing was that there was a moment when the board we said, problem is, to achieve it, we can't afford this, we're not going to do it. And he just looked us in the eye and said, he just looked the non-execs in the eye and just said, I'm sorry, this is not optional. So the whole thing about not having self-determination for me was a real issue, about the sense to shape stuff. And just an opportunity, and ironically, through the leadership development programme that the NHS had put me through, the tail end of that was, we're now going to bring in some recruitment consultants to help you develop your CV, who then touted me around. Actually, the people who I was then approached about a job with as the managing director of services with what was then RNID, Royal National Institute for Deaf People, Action on Hearing Loss, to go back into the voluntary sector. They had just won Charity of the Year twice in a row, effectively, and it was the opportunity to run their social enterprises, kind of call centres, and community services for deaf people with learning disabilities and mental health needs.
So social enterprises just started to become sexy.
Yeah.
I don't know where they came out. They came out of left field. I mean, the PCTs needed them to get rid of all their community nurses.
They did.
And so there's still some that have survived, I think. The rest, I think, they got given away to Virgin in some kind of slavery deal. So social enterprises, I was interested in those. I helped to with one of the first that was started down in Surrey, and it looked like a model that was right for the health service. I thought, people don't work in the health service if they want to make a shed load of money. They won't tell you this, but they work fundamentally because they care a lot about what they do. Yeah. And to be able to care a lot about what you do and run the show, it seems to me like an idea made in heaven, but it never really caught on. Is it too much of a risk?
But the people, well, I think it is. I think it's slowly growing, but you're quite right. It's been much slower than anticipated, and I think they're just operating in very constrained environments. And when I talk to the leaders of social enterprises in the health sector who are genuinely taken over, community health trusts and so on, what again they're having to work through is all the professional silos, because they just want to do one visit to someone's home. They don't want a community nurse and then a physio and then
it's a bit like Birdsong, which I'm sure which we spoke about a lot of time. Okay, so fine, you got fed up with that? And
no, I didn't. I really enjoyed it. After 5 years of that, I learned massively about disability, about community services, and about running residential community, because we run residential community homes as well as running these social enterprises. And then I was asked to. I did that for 5 years, and then I was asked to apply to go back to the Red Cross as their managing director, overseeing the UK, the international, and the development of an advocacy programme. And to be honest, I'm still a believer.
Why does the Red Cross need advocacy?
Because if we're going to, at the end of the day, the footprint that we have is simply not enough to change the world. And what we need to do is to maximise.
Bono's going to do that.
No. But what we want to do is to take the learning that in-out report is actually start to generate insights into what we do in the areas that we're focusing on, go-to areas, generate insight that then influences others and build momentum.
Quite a lot of people, this audience is very knowledgeable, but a lot of people watching won't realise the depth of services that you provide. And if you go back in the history, you used to run the ambulance service in Scotland, I think, at one stage.
Yeah, no, we've done. Our role alongside health services goes right way back to the First World War, and the role we played in the First World War with some of the community hospitals that were set up for returning servicemen, and then after the Second World War again, very naturally working alongside the NHS.
Tell you what interests me, as well as having the first motorised ambulances in the First World War, which I thought was a bit of a hoot, it's not bad enough with all the mud with the horses. I can't imagine driving an ambulance all the mud. But where does the international consent come from to your neutrality?
Well, that's fascinating. So neutrality is our three key operating principles are humanity, which is about helping people; impartiality, which is we'll help you, drawn from the battlefield, irrespective of your nationality, religion, ethnicity, gender, all of that stuff, as you'd expect. And then the neutrality piece is saying that we will not campaign you may challenge me on this, in controversial ways on political issues. And the key about that is about jeopardising access. So the Red Cross around the world is able to visit people in prisons, political prisoners, all of the time in order to influence the authorities to improve the conditions in those prisons. And after each visit, we write a report that says, this is good, but this is not good, etc. Human Rights Watch or Amnesty, again, playing their part in the ecosystem, would actually, they can get the story out of the prison and then publicise it. Of course, they'll never be allowed back. The key for us is about the way in which we operate that preserves the right of access. So in Syria, the key is to be able to cross the front line. If we criticise, the Assad regime, then we won't be allowed to cross the front line that enables us to support people on both sides of the. Well, sadly, there's many sides to that conflict, on all sides of that conflict. So
just focus on the people.
So a lot of it, if I may say, is and what we've learnt about over the last 3 or 4 years, because we've spent a lot of time thinking about what is advocacy and how do we do it in a way that doesn't jeopardise that neutrality. And it's a lot about bearing witness. So what do we see? What do we see? It's not controversial to describe, the situation facing refugees who are destitute living on the streets in this country. That's just bearing witness. And where we can see how policy could change that would make would reduce their vulnerability, reduce their chance of actually connecting with the system, accessing a GP, getting a lawyer, and all of that stuff, and telling the story about how government policy does or doesn't cause that. That is, the same with the in-out report. What we're describing there is not controversial.
I want to come on to the report. It's an excellent report, but I am interested in this niche that you somehow got, because most charities campaign, don't they?
Yeah.
They are campaigning, and they either gain or lose traction because they are campaigners.
Yeah.
And when you look at that, I wrote a piece the other day about the charity sector, and I rather felt that the charity sector was too congested by, and this you have to express this very clearly, because I'm not being critical of the charities, but they are often started out of bereavement or grief for the best of intentions. And I mean, I was involved a little bit in some bowel cancer charities where we got them all together and said, look, you would be so much more powerful if you had one vision, or at least had one annual report, or tried to focus in some way on its own. And it just seems to me that we depend a lot on the third sector, but the big names are there, aren't there? Whereas Macmillan, which is a business, you've got the Terence Higgins Trust, business, Red Cross, business. It's run like a business, and the minor charities. I wonder if they don't just dilute themselves because there are so many of them.
Well, I've said before, so yes, I think there are too many charities. If you do a search, so when I was in the deafness field, you do a search on the Charity Commission registers, 400 or 500 charities with the word deafness in their title. If you had half that number, you'd still have loads of choice and diversity, but you'd have half the number of CEOs, half the number of payroll officers, well, you'd have a greater chance of actually building capacity. And of course, but the danger is that we've not explained well, and we're not being helped by our regulator either in terms of the outgoing chair of the Charity Commission, is that there's a narrative builds up in some of the right-wing press, right-wing MPs around small charities good, large charities bad. But we didn't start out big. The Red Cross was tiny to start. It was just an idea. It was an acorn that grew, and actually because
it's a combination of two organisations, wasn't it?
No, it's a really simple, powerful idea. That's our founder saw the carnage on the Battle of Solferino in northern Italy and said, wouldn't it be great if in every country in the world there were volunteers who were ready to be neutral and impartial, zealous and thoroughly qualified volunteers, mind you, qualified, who were ready to provide help to whoever needed it. And that was an idea that went viral, before we ever had the internet and email and Instagram and all that malarkey. It led to the advocacy for the Geneva Conventions to create the rules of war. And actually, we didn't. My point is, we grew large because it was a simple, powerful idea that remained relevant to our times. And the challenge with the small charities is not only the risk of duplication, but it's also, more importantly, actually about the risk to the pathway. So, when I think about the pathway for refugees, if they have to get support from a whole bunch of different local organisations in order to piece together, some kind of life, that's not good for them. There are things that diaspora organisations, for example, can do that we'll never be able to do, and we want to. In fact, we work with lots of small organisations, both in the refugee sector and in the health and social care sector. But the point is, small is not inherently good, and proliferation. 1,000 flowers blooming is not inherently good if it leads to fragmentation.
We certainly do have that. On the bigger charities, they have to be run as a business.
Well, I'm going to challenge you. You meant to. I meant to say that.
Well, let me clarify what I mean. I mean, you get the really big organisations with a big footprint who come in and they compete for contracts with the NHS, for example. Now, Treasury rules, I think, say you can't have a contract bigger than a third of your turnover. So, you've got to be pretty big to get something of any size. And it's at the point where I suppose what I'm saying is the point where you kind of stop being a charity and start being a business. And Macmillan, I think, have been successful at that because they still have people running marathons and making jam and doing daft things to raise money. And without the Terence Higgins Trust, for example, we wouldn't have the triple therapy HIV protocols that we've got now. So they do make a big difference, but you have to kind of almost stop being what you started out as in order to engage with government.
I think that's true, so we're at an interesting transition point, actually. So I have resisted the use of business language over my time as CEO because I think the risk is that it plays to the narrative that somehow we've lost our soul. And as I said earlier, I'm as inspired by that original vision of our founder, Henri Dunant, now as I was when I first ever joined, my first stint with the Red Cross, and most of the people I meet within the Red Cross are there. That's what inspires them. And if we start to talk and concede, as it were, that we're a business, then I think we do risk losing that sense of the soul. Where you're completely right is that you can't run an organisation of our size with the diversity of activities within it without being really businesslike in the way in which you work and really challenging ourselves about. We can't do it all through relationships. We have to use technology. We have to have rigorous processes. We have to be compliant. We have to do GDPR. We have to run bits of it like a machine. But somehow within that, we have to hold on to our ethos and our soul about who we are, why we're here, and why we were founded.
Well, all organisations could have a vision like that, couldn't they? I mean,
Absolutely.
the NHS perhaps has lost the knack of doing that. I've written a piece, I think, comes out this week, where I'm talking about the mission of what is it is tomorrow. What is the mission statement for the NHS? I don't know. I mean, if you Google mission statement NHS, you get 3,000 gazillion answers, because every little tiny bit of the NHS has got its own mission statement and it's got its own view about what it's supposed to be doing. We don't seem to be able to march in step.
No, I think that's right. That's why you've got to hold on to why you're here. And actually, we're exploring an idea around our brand around being the platform for human kindness. We don't want to monopolise anything. But we want to mobilise human kindness for people in crisis. And people can come and support us in a whole range of ways. They can give their time, they can give their money, they can help, they can write to their MP when we're trying to influence MPs around family reunion, policy for refugees. So we start to mobilise people to show their kindness. So there's that discretionary moment. But
when you become that kind of polished organisation, do we expect too much? I mean, look what's happened to Oxfam. So there we've got 5-7 years ago, a country ripped apart, no proper rule of law, no proper infrastructure. Some people behaved badly, no policing at the time, probably not very much managerial connectivity with what was going on because of the nature of the infrastructure. And here is the organisation today going through hell and back because of the behaviour of probably less than a dozen people. Now, the other side of the argument is bad behaviour is always bad behaviour, and we're not going to put up with it. We're going to stamp it out. But you must worry about that because you've got a sprawling organisation and you span some very difficult places.
No, you're absolutely right. We work, so essentially half our charitable spend is in the UK and half of it is in our international work. And we're working across 30 countries in some very difficult places. And so,
are we going to have a story about the Red Cross?
I hope not, but I don't know. The interesting thing about the Oxfam stories, I think, by the way, you've diagnosed it exactly. But the interesting thing about Oxfam were very open early about the number of safeguarding cases they had. And I think, I've got the exact figure, it was over 80. But a couple of interesting things about that. I think, firstly, 2/3 of those cases were in the shops. Only 1/3 were overseas, so this is close to home in terms of the day-to-day volunteering activity where things are happening, so that none of us can afford to be complacent about it. And of course, the other risk is that actually their safeguarding stand, as indeed one of the American universities has commented, certainly that their processes around, for example, identifying sexual harassment were amongst the best in the sector. And therefore, of course, the numbers, their figures look particularly damaging. But maybe it's just because they're better. And so you've got this huge irony of the current situation.
Yeah. And how do you, so you've got this big, polished organisation trying to conduct good works, let's put it like that, and in the midst of it all you get something like that's happened. Can you really do safeguarding in those circumstances? Or are you really at the mercy of people who volunteer and may actually volunteer for sinister motives that you may be unaware of?
Well, I think it's just like safeguarding, in principle, it's the same as safeguarding here, which the challenge is that you've got a lot of people on short-term contracts. So the aid, I mean, as has been described in the press again accurately, which is that you've got a lot of people on short contracts, 6 months to 2 years, who move around between different agencies. Therefore, the whole process, so we would have rigorous processes of, recruitment, selection, training, but referencing can be an issue because you deal with whatever reference you've got. And actually, so some of the ideas we're now exploring together as a sector are around, for example, humanitarian passports. So actually,
that was the Save the Children, was it? I think came up with that.
Indeed,
I was going to ask you about that. I mean, that does seem to me to be something you could do.
Absolutely.
The extent to which it, like everything else, could be fiddled, I don't know, but you could do it, I suppose.
Well, we can look at it. And
you're going to have to, aren't you?
Yeah, no, yes, absolutely. We'll definitely be looking at it. We'll also be looking at how we, and by the way, what we're doing is a root and branch review of all of our processes and records and so on to make sure that we're fit for purpose.
But you do get to the point, don't you? I mean, when Oxfam had the problem with the shops, I was astounded to see how many safeguarding issues there were in the shops. But I suppose if you think about it, if you are of that mind to want to do that kind of thing, volunteering in an environment where, because you're a volunteer, people say you must be a lovely person, you're volunteering, you're doing it for all the right reasons, come in. Or do you say, hang on a minute, you're a lovely person, come in, but wait a minute. I mean, I never get just a little people to read my stuff. No, I used to write endlessly about the Duchess when she was my mum. And she was about 85, I think, at the time. And she came home one day and she said, with this damn great form, I said, what is that? And she said, I've got she used to run the tea bar at the day centre. And she said, I've got to get a CRB check. You see, it's this bloody great big form for this 80, I think she was 85 then. I said, why? She said, well, I work with vulnerable adults. I said, Mum, you are a vulnerable adult. It just seemed to me to be bizarre. But I mean, you have to, it's difficult, isn't it? You want to encourage people, but on the other hand, you don't want to put them off by turning the whole thing to a horrible bureaucracy.
No, absolutely right. So so we have a vision of mobilising many, many more people to play a part in their community, be it under the auspices of the Red Cross or not. And a lot of it will be around good neighbourliness, about people showing their kindness, spotting when people's curtains haven't been drawn. And
you go into people's homes.
Exactly. But the moment you do that under the auspices of the Red Cross, then there is immediately a whole issue of responsibility about safeguarding, about DBS checks, about training and so on.
It's your backside.
Yeah, exactly. So how we do that in those circumstances. Of course, the thing about in shops as well is the range, the generational range. You've got from 14, 15-year-olds up to 85-year-olds together who have different, different language. And what's acceptable in one generation is not acceptable in another generation.
So you're reviewing your arrangements?
No, we're absolutely, because it's. I think every sector should be reviewing its arrangements. So we're reviewing everything, both about our UK arrangements and our international arrangements around all aspects of the recruitment, selection, development, referencing process, and we're reviewing historical records.
I guess all you can do really is that, and then if something does go wrong, and it will, because that's life, is you move quickly and transparently. I think where Oxfam come unstuck is I think they probably tried to think, well, do we reveal the fact we've had this very ugly incident and then jeopardise the charitable giving, or do we just deal with it like a business might deal with it actually and say, right, bugger off and there's a month's salary, You can't do that, can you?
And what you must do, I think, because that is the backstop, is you must tell the regulator. So we have Charity Commission is our regulator.
Are they any good?
Turn it off. I think.
Let me say, they look pretty supine and dozy to me.
Yeah, they have. That wasn't me agreeing, by the way.
What other opinions are available?
Indeed. So they know they need to step up their act. They've got a great new chief executive who absolutely gets the sector, and we are scrupulous about reporting to them when stuff is going
So we're back with Mike Adamson. Thank you for that. We're talking about the role of the regulator, really, and the difficulties that there are. What my views are on regulation, and inspection doesn't work. It's a complete waste of money. If organisations are run properly, you don't need regulators. You know, do you need a regulator, really?
Let me tell you about an incredibly positive role the Charity Commission's just played. So we were incredibly active in the response to the tragedies of the terror attacks in Grenfell Tower fire last year. And we did huge amounts where we mobilised as part of local resilience plans.
I want to come on to what you do.
Yeah. And as what the charity, but there was loads and loads of agencies and organisations coming in to take action, and government itself was let's face it, stretched. What the Charity Commission is trying to do as part of its role in maintaining trust in the charity sector is actually broker the organisations together. So when you've got, the risk is that the voluntary sector is like a bunch of cats and they're very difficult to herd, and therefore to address the very issues that you raised earlier. And actually what the Charity Commission is doing quite effectively is bringing us together to broker a conversation, to broker a proposition to government around how UK emergency response could be improved. And actually they're playing a very helpful role.
So that's.
But what they should really focus on, if I may say, is stretching us around outcomes, around impact, around cost effectiveness, because that's where all of us in the not-for-profit sector, and including the public sector, are struggling about how do we measure success, and how do we know we're doing, really doing the right thing.
I mean, you mentioned Grenfell. What went wrong at Grenfell? Were the authorities just completely taken by surprise by the colossalness of the task? I mean, it looked to me that if I'd have been the Secretary of State for something or other, I'd say put the army in. They can do kitchens, they can do tents, they can do, beds in community halls. At least buy yourself some time until you can think, okay, what the hell is it we are going to do? Because you can't rehouse 300 odd families, can you?
No,
overnight.
But the army is not much use for that either. And the question is about, self-evidently, the local authority was probably too small to be able to respond to the scale of emergency that they were facing. And what's fascinating again is that, because we were there from 4 o'clock in the morning in the rest centre on the Wednesday morning as part of the local resilience plans. The local organisations who had never done an emergency response in their life, had opened up their doors at 2 o'clock in the morning to start welcoming people, obviously in real distress, coming out of the tower. And over the course of the following 2 or 3 days, the local authority just really struggled to get on top of the situation, get up to speed, which is then when the wider London authority kicked in. But the underlying issues then about providing help, as well as shortages of housing and so on, were to do with the incredibly confusion about who was in the tower. And actually some people, nobody knew who was in the tower. So actually getting a register of people, the first thing you do in any emergency, be it in the UK or overseas, you get a register of the people who need help. Getting the register of people who needed help was incredibly difficult because people disappeared. Some people's immigration status was not clear, and actually they didn't want to come forward because they were worried that then they might actually, the authorities, the Home Office, might try and move them back. Some people were concerned that if they accepted cash support, then it would affect their benefits. So some of the things that we did, as well as the visible stuff around, which included surging from St Mary's as well, home from hospital type stuff, was actually about campaigning to influence that, advocating with government that anybody in receipt of cash support following Grenfell, that should not affect their benefits, and also advocating that anybody who came forward, they should have, we argued that they should have leave to remain for a further 2 years while we sorted out what help they needed.
Did you win this?
We won the argument on the benefits, and we partially won the argument on leave to remain in the sense they got a year's leave to remain, which is still good, because that meant that people would have the confidence to come forward, and so we could actually start together to look at the help that they might need. But the whole thing was again so much learning. The first day I went there, I think was on the Thursday, and it was a hive of activity outside the tower, around the tube station, on Latimer Road. People, volunteers moving backwards and forwards with boxes in their hands. I just didn't know what was going on. Lots of people with microphones talking very loudly. But actually what those people were doing, all of that voluntary effort, and there was it really showed the kindness of people. It really did. But what they would do is collecting lots and lots of second-hand clothes. And some of it was people's old boxers that they hadn't washed. And actually what we ended up with was literally 3 football pitches worth of second-hand clothing and toys and everything else in a post office warehouse in Greenford that was just a mess, that needed sorting. And most of the stuff nobody would want, because what we do internationally now, we put cash in people's hands. If you've just come out of an earthquake, you might not want a bag of rice, you might not want the clothing we've got, you might want to pay for a school, for a roof, or you might want to pay your kids' school fees because you can't work. We need to apply the same principles in our national work, is actually put cash in people's hands, then they choose. But people want to give. They like to give something. But the act of,
it's the charity shop.
It is. They want to give something. And actually what we then had to do, got a huge barrage of abuse on social media for having allegedly stolen all of this clothing. But what we did, our shops team came in, sorted out through all of that 3 football pitches, where there's 200 tons of clothes or something. All the new stuff went back to Grenfell to be given to the people directly affected by the fire. The second-hand stuff that was floggable, to be frank, went into our shops, but on dedicated rails for Grenfell all over the country, because we've got 300 shops. All of that money went then back into the Grenfell Fire Relief Fund, so we raised 7 or 8 million quid. There was about £200,000 or £300,000 came from the sale of the clothes. That all went back into the Fire Relief Fund for cash distribution to the bereaved and hospitalised. And then the stuff that was, some stuff just needed to be burnt, and then stuff that was just rag kind of got sent off to be sold elsewhere as rag is. But it was a kind of classic sign of actually, you could completely understand. So what was heartening was the kindness of people, but actually it was the wrong kindness, because it just created, and
where did the volunteers come from? Because you had a lot of people on the ground.
Yeah, we mobilised.
Were these people who belonged to the organisation?
Yeah, we mobilised. Well, both actually, but we mobilised about 600 volunteers over the course of the 6 weeks we were there. We were there 24/7 for the first 3 or 4 weeks with 40 people on a shift at a time. So they came from London initially, but then from all over the country. Then for things like the clearance of all that second-hand clothing, we drew volunteers from the community as well to help with that, because part of that was critical for trust as well, so that people knew we weren't nicking the stuff.
And of course, none of that really percolated into the mainstream media, did it?
Nowhere near as much as we tried to tell our story. I mean, we've got a fabulous press team. Not just saying that because they're here, but actually we have. We got a lot of the story out, but it was a massively, it's a febrile atmosphere.
So I think it's a book to be written, isn't it? The Red Cross story of Grenfell.
Yeah.
It's worth doing. Do you rehearse these major incidents? I know you do. So
yes.
you're involved in something, but
no, we do.
Yeah.
And what I would say as well, Roy, is really important. And I've blogged about this and written about it because we're really proud of what we did, but we know we learned so much as well about our relationship with the authorities. The whole principle of the way in which we work is we're in the local resilience plan. We get called out. We do our thing. The problem is if the authorities are not doing their thing properly, then actually the risk is that we are not thinking creatively enough about how need is changing, what the dynamics of the community are. So we learned a lot about how we engage with a community in distress. And in some ways, I mean, the Grenfell situation, even though it was big, but it was much smaller than some of the international emergencies that we respond to. But it had far more in common with an international emergency than it did with the UK context we would expect to find. The terror attacks, by contrast, we responded in all the London attacks and Manchester. Actually, the processes and procedures, the resilience plans worked pretty well. Everyone surged, people got the help, but they didn't have the community dynamic that Grenfell had, because actually the people who were affected in the terror attacks, the people in the Ariana Grande concert had come from all over the country. If you think about the London Bridge attack, I think 6 of the 7 people who died actually were from overseas. It didn't have the they didn't have the community dimension that Grenfell had. This intense community, which
all the volumes
and all the volumes. And what's still extraordinary to me is that if you think about it was in the middle of summer, summer nights, and actually that community conducted itself with such dignity in their distress. And we went, because we needed to go and meet people in their distress as well, community meetings, but of course feelings ran high. But when you think about the interviews that were done on radio and television, incredibly moving stories about what people trying to get back, getting their lives back. It was,
what moved me, I think, was listening to people who were saying, what's being done just doesn't connect with what we need.
Yes.
And that's brought out in the point you made. You're an advocacy organisation, you're not political, but you did stray into politics, didn't you?
Did we?
A little while ago, when you were, what did you say? We were like the third world or something, the NHS? What? Go on, try it again.
So yes, you may have spotted that we commented on the stretch facing the NHS, and
what did you say?
We used the phrase humanitarian crisis.
Oh, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Absolutely brilliant, because it just hit everybody where it hurts.
But what's interesting about that is, and the reason we did it, and I read the draft press release, and it was a phrase that I had used internally. We are working, the phrase I was using today, we're working on some of the humanitarian crises of our time. More people displaced in the world than ever before. More, frail elderly people. 1 in 3 people born today will live to be 100. All that stuff. Actually, we're working on the real issues of our time here in the UK. And it came back to me in a press release. I read it, and I then looked up some of the definitions of humanitarian crisis. And what it talked about is large numbers of people not getting the help they need, and sometimes that those crises could be, hidden or invisible. And we used the phrase first time in the context of social care in around November, and essentially no one blinked. I did one Radio 4 interview on the back of it on 10 o'clock news on a Sunday night when everybody's either tucked up or watching Homeland or whatever they're doing, and there was hardly any reaction. When we used the phrase again, I didn't, and the reason we used it was about the large numbers and the chaotic situation we were seeing in people's homes when they were being discharged from hospital. And that actually they weren't getting the help they need, and that the figures were startling. It's 500,000 people, and now CQC even says it's over 1 million people not getting the help that they need. We used it in the context.
It's even worse, isn't it? It's 500,000 people who used to get it.
Exactly, who used to. That's the point.
And
Quite
because
right.
I don't think a lot of people really understand this, but the eligibility criteria can be set by local governments individually. It's not a national criteria for who gets help. So the councils, if they run out of money, they raise the criteria, look after everybody that falls into that criteria, and then they say, oh, we're providing care for everybody who wants it. But actually they cheated because they moved the criteria.
Yeah. And no one understands social care, though, do they?
No.
I mean, that's the
well, I think they're starting to.
No, they are, but but they don't. People think they understand the NHS, but they don't really understand social care.
No, they don't. You were right. It is a humanitarian crisis, and we do have refugees in our own system.
Well, we have people not getting the help, and it's, what we, and we learnt again so much about it. And I don't know whether we'd use the phrase again. Well, we won't use the phrase again because in a way it was used and it had an impact. What you certainly had, and I mean Sarah Woolston put it quite well actually, about human crisis at scale. And what I think is, when we look at the stories and the challenges facing the NHS, health and social care, it is still a crisis. And we're not good at handling these two truths. It is true that the NHS is working harder and better than ever before. And that's what I regret about the story we told. We should have really brought that to the fore. But there are a whole bunch of people not getting the help they need. And if we frame that in the context of the developed world, every major developed economy facing this challenge of how do we help ensure that our frail elderly people can live well independently for longer and then get the support they need when they hit a crisis and get back on their feet again, then actually, surely a government, it's not controversial. That's not a controversial thing to say. You don't even have to be that brave to say it, even in government. But we've got this into this place where I remember watching the opening ceremony of the Olympics when Danny Boyle did his thing on the NHS, and I have to say my heart sank because the NHS shouldn't be. It's not helpful that the NHS is a national religion, because it makes it impossible for it to evolve and change. Or makes it more difficult. Not impossible, it does evolve and change, but it makes it more difficult. And we've got to be able to challenge or explore what a new way of working might be that's ready for the
What is, I mean,
21st
everybody
century.
says to me the NHS needs to change, and I would say, well, okay, fine, how? What would you do?
Well, I think you wouldn't, you've got the same people. So the NHS was designed at a time, the post-war period, when, I don't know what the life expectancy was at that point.
I was 72, I think.
And what is it now? Mid-80s?
172.
Yeah,
I hope.
exactly. Yeah.
I hope.
With multiple people with multiple conditions, and I think I'm not sure what I would do is, and it's not just kicking it into the long grass to say we should actually properly look at this.
We've done it. Dilnot did it.
I don't know that he did, because what he didn't do, he did look at how do we fund long-term care, and I think that was valuable.
But that's all that matters, isn't it? You can't do anything without the money.
Well, I don't think
local government has had its budgets cut by 40%.
Yes.
Right? How are you going to reinstate that? The NHS by 2020 will probably be 50 billion up the swanny. How are you going to? You can only put more money into it. I mean, look,
but aren't we looking at it through an institutional lens then, rather than a people lens?
Well, maybe, but let's think about that. I mean, we've got the most admired healthcare system in the world. Why? Not because of our outcomes, because they aren't universally good. Some of them are, but not universally. No country's got a monopoly on the best outcomes. Why our system works is it's tax funded, so it's taken, harvested rich or poor. If you're rich, you pay a bit more, poor you don't. It's tax funded, free at the point of need, rich or poor, run over by a bus, you still get sorted out. So drug addict or granny, rich or poor, we pick you up, scoop you up, get you back up on your feet again, and you've paid for it through your taxes. If you want to have co-payments, you have your co-payments from your right-hand pocket, taxes from your left-hand pocket, it's still your trousers. So what of that do you want to change?
The problem is that it's not nipping things in the bud. So
No, that's spending money differently. That's spending money differently. If you're saying we should be spending more money on public health,
absolutely.
well, I agree with that. And Shirley sat there and we had the same debate. And she gave me a right telling off. But nevertheless, the public health thing, maybe public health has got nothing to do with health. Maybe health is about education, and maybe we're still stuck in the era of where we think public health is clean water, adult literacy and childhood immunisation. It's different, it's not that anymore.
Yeah, and it's starting to organise a system around doing the simple things that enable people to live independently for as long as possible.
Are we talking about elderly people now?
Primarily.
The frail, comorbidities.
Primarily,
Yeah.
I think, because that's where the bulk of the resources are going,
Yeah.
isn't it? And that's where people are losing their ability to live independently,
Yeah.
and ending up in beds and so on.
So you've got to do that with support in the home before it gets.
You have, and
to
you've
the
then
job.
got to have a system. So we're part
Which
of
is what you in your report.
Yeah.
Okay, well, tell us about the report, because I think if you haven't read the report, you really should. It's got some. I mean, to be honest, and I'm not trying to be a smart-ass about it. I mean, there's no rocket science in the report, but it is really good common sense.
Absolutely. There is no rocket science. It's simple, powerful things that make a difference. So what the report does, it interviews a whole bunch of our service users. So we do home from hospital service, helping people come out of hospital, get back on their feet again, make sure there's food in the fridge, the heating's on, they connect into the local things they want to be able to do, the confidence to get on the bus, go to the shops. We put people in A&E departments, non-clinical people in A&E departments, and I've sat in Bristol, for example, with our team, and what they're doing is screening the patient administration system, looking for people over the age of 75 with no next of kin, and then they go and talk to the clinician and say, is that person medically well enough to go home? These services are typically offered between midday and midnight, because that's when clinicians are worried about discharging people without support. Yeah? So that's what we do. What we interviewed a whole bunch of people in our services, and then a whole bunch of professionals around the simple things that would make a difference. and looking at, particularly readmissions, and the rate of the percent rate of increase in readmissions is twice the rate of increase in admissions. And what we then start to do is what are the simple things that could be done to actually prevent that happening? Because it's all about what the situation is at home that they're being discharged to. So it is about the simple things that nobody who's been readmitted should be discharged without somebody going to do a health check with them when they go home, to check that maybe they keep falling, because actually they're tripping over the carpet. Or the example that, we had, some good BBC News coverage on it, a lady who'd been experiencing repeat admissions in Ipswich with COPD issues, but then actually, when we got involved and saw the situation at home, it was no surprise. There was chaos at home. There was dust everywhere. We just couldn't breathe. So what we did was we arranged for the place to be tidied up, got it all hoovered, got the dust levels down. So actually, by addressing the home situation at home, we're starting to give the possibility that that lady could live at home for longer. So
where are you doing this?
Doing it in England, in about 61 hospitals around the UK.
And how do you get in? Do the hospitals invite you?
Well, we if only it were that easy. We turn up. We get commissioned by hospitals, clinical commissioning groups, and local authorities to some extent. And what we would, and then within about 15 of those services, we've also got presence in the A&E departments. And again, it's non-clinical. That's the thing I wrote to Simon Stevens about after he produced the last version of the 5-year forward view, which in the circumstances I think was pretty good. But what it didn't talk about was the role that non-clinical personnel could play in helping keep people well for longer, and then supporting them when they come out. And I just think that the part of the problem. So again, the Richmond Group, this group of health charities, produced a report called "Do the Right Thing." There's a remarkable quote in it, and what's remarkable, you had a piece in one of your blogs last week. The weird thing is that we now see this as weird. I think it was about the suffragettes, or they didn't think, or whichever way around the weirdness was.
The phrase I use was "weird always wins in the end."
Yeah,
because what we think is weird now, we won't at some time in the future.
Exactly.
Weird wins.
No, exactly, and it's just what the remarkable thing about this phrase is that it's remarkable. So a very eminent, I'm not going to say who, chief exec of a hospital trust commented in this report that the reason he was so grateful about the Alzheimer's Society, the work that they'd done in the hospital, is that it had made him aware of the role of the hospital trust in understanding the situation at home and in the community as part of their overall responsibility for well-being. And what's remarkable to me is that that's even worth remarking on. It's just extraordinary. And so I'm on the prevention board for the 5-year forward view, and there's a good paper actually that came.
Prevent another 5-year forward.
No, exactly. So a good paper came about the role of the provider community, the hospital trusts, in around community health and understanding the health of patients at home. That's very welcome. The problem was that the paper was written entirely by hospital trusts, not by involving people who are involved at local level, be it local authority or the office.
The trouble is the hospital trusts have got money, they've got the resource, they're all skint and all the rest of it, but fundamentally they're the biggest players in the local healthcare environment, local economy, and if anything's going to change, they're going to move it and shake it, aren't they? Which is why I'm quite keen on the prospect of having, they're not called accountable care organisations anymore because you end up in court apparently, but whatever it is they're called. District health authorities. I used to run them, So we're going to have district health authorities again, and I think that moves us back. I mean, district health authorities are a disaster. I ran one; it was a disaster, but because it was before Microsoft, Excel spreadsheets, and before mobile phones. There was life before that, and we tried to run things on graph paper, and of course we never knew where the money was or any of it. But now, these days, you've got a much better grip on the management. You can do this stuff. And what do you think of now they've changed the sign over the door, the Department of Health and something. I know it's social service, social care. I don't know. I call it DH plus because I can't figure out what it is. What are they? Do you think? It's all gone very quiet, isn't it? There is an advisory group. Are you on that?
We're not on that advisory. We're on a number of other.
Do you know
things.
who is?
I don't actually.
It's easier to find out who the Grand Master of the Freemasons is. I don't know what's going on. But there's some work being done on this. Do you know what it is?
I don't.
Do you have any idea what it should be?
Well, it is.
Because if you put these two organisations together, Mike, I mean, let's face it, I wrote a book years ago on mergers, and I said two turkeys don't make an equal. You know, the NHS is a turkey, social services have got no money, it's a turkey. You put the two together, you just get a bigger debt.
And I'm not aware, I mean, and of course, yeah, the Director General for Social Care always sat in the Department of Health anyway. So, I mean, it's kind of, so what is it that's actually going to change, and what are they going to bring?
Well, do
what is
we
going to
think
be
that
brought
local
together?
elected councillors are going to say, yes, have our adult social care money, please take it away because it's a nightmare to run, you can have the blame? Or are they going to say, no, this is our people, I'm elected to look after my people, we're going to do it here? There's a row brewing, isn't it?
And that's why it requires, I mean, I think it's not wrong to say that there needs to be, whether it's a commission or something, there needs to be someone to look at this properly, not just try and do it in the next few months, because this is a problem we've been living with for...
Yeah, but look, we've got this, somebody's come up with a cross-party thing. Corbyn says he won't do it. I mean,
Yeah.
John Ashworth, he sat in that chair, he was an entertaining guy, great guy, big brain on him, nice young man. But to not want to do the cross-party thing, I don't get it.
I don't get it either. I think
I'm
how
going to ring
else-
him up and tell him that we don't get it. Okay.
No, I just think because it's the problem of our times in every developed economy.
Yeah.
And actually, how are we going to help people to live independently? It's not. I mean, the question is easy. The solution, given the institutional arrangements we're locked into at the moment, is not easy.
Well, I tell you where it works.
But we can do lots of simple things
Yeah,
better.
we know
that's
that's why we run the academy. It's all about thinking.
absolutely.
Mark Bricknell wrote a book about. It's a great book. If you're listening, Mark, it is a great book, and it's about international comparisons and all the rest of it. And if you look at where they actually get this right, there's a huge reliance on families getting it right.
Right.
There's almost no country in the world that gets its health and social care working properly together without the huge involvement of the individuals and then their families and their family lives. And that's a salutary lesson.
And I think that was the interesting thing, again, within the in-out report, that I can't remember, I think the stat is something like 70% of the people that we support live alone, but the people who live with somebody else are much better at accessing other support. So it's a double whammy for the person who lives alone. Not only are they living alone, but they actually can't access, they're less able to access further support because they haven't got somebody to help advocate.
Because you only ever go where there's a disaster, don't you? You don't actually have a brand for coming in other than, houses demolished and people are homeless and the worst probably, for you coming in, that made a huge impact.
Yes, but that's a misunderstanding of what we do. Because
Well, that's your brand. You're not going to change your brand.
No, but our role is about crisis, but we're there before, during and after. If you look at the work in Bangladesh, actually we're working, the Bangladesh Red Crescent is working with communities.
The NHS isn't Bangladesh.
No, but indeed it's not. But that's why we've been working with the NHS for 80 years, or its predecessors, to actually help people get back on their feet again when there's a crisis, in partnership with the NHS. That's what we do. And formally, actually, the Red Cross is an auxiliary to government, in fact. We're actually formed by Royal Charter. And you can respond much better in an emergency if you're working alongside a partner already. So that's what we do.
Okay, Terry, we've got some questions on from Twitter.
Well, just wanting to know, but I think maybe you've covered it, how to access the report and the content of the new report.
Okay, you can access the report by going onto the Red Cross website, Google Red Cross, British Red Cross, and it's on the front page of the website. So download, it's free. Okay?
The in-out report, if you search on that, then it will come up.
In-out report. Okay, so wake up, don't be dozy, use Google, for Christ's sake, grow up. Right, next question.
Thank you, that was helpful.
I'm loving you all. Go on, is that it?
No, that was
Okay,
the main
fine.
one. There was lots of
Right, so,
back
well, I
and
mean, we're going to close, I think. Michael, where we can't carry on as we can, right? So you've got some cockeyed idea of doing everything differently, but you haven't spelled it out. There isn't enough money. We're going to Helena. We're going to Helena Handcart.
Yeah,
Discuss.
But the key to it, and I wrote to you about this, and you didn't reply, actually, if I may say.
Has anybody else written to me?
Normally you're very good at that.
I'm very
but
sorry.
actually, because
I think it's probably too difficult.
I got a bunch of people together, chief execs of hospital trusts, directors of adult services, and I said, well, what do we do about this?
Yeah.
And the key thing, if we do nothing else, it is about giving people the chance to express what their goals are. Just imagine if that shoulder specialist, if every professional had to deal with what the aspirations of that person are at every professional handoff. So even when that person who's the shoulder specialist, who is looking at some tiny proportion of the shoulder, understood that the reason Mrs. Smith, getting her shoulder to work again is important is because she loves gardening. I think they would start to look less at the shoulder and more at the person. And then you start to build up a holistic approach to the way in which we support people. And then you design the institutional arrangements around whatever makes that possible.
I get that, but we are where we are. Right. And we've got 50 billion quid worth of debt in the NHS by 2020.
But there is no quick fix, Roy. You know that.
Is it, no, what I'm coming to, I'm saying, is there a fix? I mean, within the life of a parliament, there isn't.
No.
If we go back to the European average funding, I mean, at the moment we're behind Germany, France and Iceland. If we got back to some kind of semblance of European percentage of GDP, it still wouldn't touch the sides. I mean, are we getting to the point where there's some stuff we can do and some stuff that we're going to have to stop doing?
Yeah, I mean, you know, at the height of that debate about what we said in January last year, you know, literally on the weekend the story broke, and I can tell you we were not popular. But talking to
I'm saying you got a phone call.
We were talking.
Very sinister phone.
Talking to one of the most senior people in the NHS. Again, I went, you know, who just said, I won't do his accent either, because that would be a giveaway. But he just said, we're over-specialised. We're over-specialised. And therefore, he described the story of his own parent-in-law, I can't remember which one it was, who was being passed between specialties, and therefore not able to get a holistic
well,
support.
you see, I don't think that matters. I mean, I think what I want to know is, why is it that little old ladies living in a care home could end up in hospital with a UTI? In a care home. How does that happen? And Terry and I were at NFJ, the DH, weren't we, beginning of the week, where they do a kind of 3-monthly review of the stuff they're doing in London. And they were telling us that there was one care home, I would name them if I knew who it was, but they wouldn't tell me, had 6 ambulances picking up 6 little old ladies who'd got the flu.
You know,
For Christ's sake, what does that cost?
yeah.
You know, there's a whole piece of work to do in care homes.
Well, it's a system, isn't it?
Well, it's the elderly frail, and as I said when I started, you know, you look at Australia, they kind of carved that out, and these are different services run differently. So that maybe there's some solace there. But when people say they want to change the NHS, I don't think we do. I think we just want to fund the bloody thing properly, make it a bit more efficient. That would do for me.
That would obviously help, but it wouldn't deal with the fact that you've got all these frail elderly people who are being supported by social care, and they're the same people who are ending up taking up 70% of the resources in the hospitals.
But it won't
And
always
actually,
be like that, will it?
some of that doesn't need to happen.
It won't always be like that. Because, I mean, that's a generation who've been the post-war generation, who've had poor diets, poor working conditions, and a lot of their problems have been brought on with the life they lead and how they led it, innocently enough. But now you've got the baby boomers coming through who are much fitter, they haven't smoked, they're on the net, on the web. You know, there could be a whole fitter generation of older people coming through who will complain like hell if we don't get anything wrong, if we get things wrong.
Well, but there'll still be people in the
You're
last
not
3
gonna be
4 years.
frail elderly, are you?
No, I hope not. my wife wants us to go out to Marrakesh and walk out into the sea in Morocco on a high of drugs, and then say goodbye to her. rather than burden the NHS. So,
book 3 tickets.
exactly.
So when we start to think about how we're going to do what we're going to do, I mean, what we are doing differently is working with you, which is a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's about. But you can't just do that and then say the NHS just give the NHS a bit more money. You need to look at it much more holistically around how people will live, about the role, the responsibilities we all have to each other.
Do you think we should put taxes up?
I don't know whether we should put taxes up, but I mean,
Well, they're talking about tuppence on national insurance and ring fencing it.
Yeah, there's a big debate about hypothecated taxes, and some clever people say we shouldn't have a hypothecated tax. other clever
There are
people.
some very dim-witted people say we shouldn't have hypotheses.
Right,
All the clever ones are saying
Oh,
we
right.
should. Yeah.
Otherwise, the IFS were saying we should have that.
Well, they know. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there's something about enabling people to look after themselves, our responsibility to each other, and how we nurture that. And some of the ideas that have been around, about the challenge we never stick with ideas like big society. Like, Theresa May floated the idea of the shared society, but there is
Is that strong and stable?
There
Or
is
was
a-
that deeper meaning?
Well, who knows? But there is something. But there is something important in those ideas. And,
There is.
And the problem is we're not actually prepared to nurture them.
It's a sense.
And
Of,
then-
it's a sense of community. That's
Yeah.
what's missing. Right, on the last nuggets. Who's got something they want to say? Comment, ask a question. It's up to you. Don't go home thinking, "Oh, I wish I had enough." Yes, ma'am. Stand up. Tell us who you are. Give us your PIN number and your way.
My name is Sasha Wallace. I'm a project manager within the NHS, have been for the last decade, running a social enterprise around mental health. And I absolutely agree with what Michael's saying about it is about big society and it is about enabling people to take more care of their own health. I work for a trust, a CCG that commissions the Red Cross across Westminster, Hammersmith and Fulham and Kensington and Chelsea to do hospital at home, which is a fantastic service. And I absolutely want to return to the point about market shaping at the beginning of the lecture, when that is really what we need to be concentrating on, the idea that we keep going to the big six for management consulting, and actually what we need to be doing is talking to the voluntary sector, because they are the ones with the roots and branches out into the community. They understand the landscape, they understand people on a much more visceral daily level, and they can offer so much value.
Interesting point.
At a
Perhaps you
fraction
should,
of
perhaps
the
we should
cost,
have the
I
Red
must
Cross.
say, Michael.
Should we have the Red Cross consultancy?
Well, I think the Red Cross do a great example for what other charities can do. There are lots of great small charities, like you say, the comet tail of what's out there, and that's what's not being utilised enough.
That is,
Whenever
Sasha,
we-
that's a really good point, because if you took all the people who are in the elderly sector, so who you've got Help the Aged, who else is there?
AGK, Independent Age,
Independent Age,
and then lots and lots of local organisations.
and you. If there were some way to kind of crowdsource that lot together, then you could have I mean, you're in 16 hospitals, did you say that?
60.
60.
60 in England and
Yeah,
about
I mean,
90 in the UK.
that's a big coverage, isn't
Yeah.
it? That's like a third of all those.
And we've taken...
But bringing those organisations together to model themselves on your offering now, that would make a huge difference. It's a
Yeah.
good point, Sasha.
We really build on social capital in that way. What we've always discovered by sharing the pathway with the voluntary sector is that they really understand what's happening on the ground. Just like a disaster emergency, they have that route into people's lives. They understand what that really means on a day-to-day level. And in terms of reducing admissions to hospitals, managing the detox pathway, that's what everyone's focus has got to be about now. And developing community services, developing our community to be able to respond effectively to this massive challenge around A&E admission and local authority front door admissions as well. It is about connecting with the voluntary sector.
It is
we do that piecemeal,
Yeah.
we don't do it enough.
Just
and
got
it's-
an eye on the time,
It's
Sasha,
very
so
valuable.
Don't mean to be rude, but I've got an eye on the time. We're nearly finished. I mean, it is interesting, isn't it? You, as I said to you before, Christ said we've got the NHS. We don't need the Red Cross sorting themselves out. You're the food parcel people in Bangladesh, but actually, you're carving out an interesting additional niche where you can see how the third sector could be doing what they're doing within their capacity.
Yeah, and the thing about that in-out report, and I think the reason it's actually also a breakthrough for us in our own thinking is that it's framed around people and patient flow. We're about people, but we recognise that what matters to the NHS is patient flow.
Yeah.
And so we kind of land it. The challenge when I became a director of commissioning, I thought, I'm going to change all this. So I invited the voluntary sector in. And of course, I then had a room full of 60 organisations thinking, what the hell am I going to do with them all? So actually, we've got to make it easier to work with us as well. And we have done joint work with AGK and RBS and others around presenting joint propositions. I think we need to do more of that in order to make it easy to transact with us and build relationships with us.
Needs perhaps a neutral platform. Look, we're right up against the buffers of time, unless anybody's got anything they want to say quickly. I think, yes, ma'am. You're from Torture UK.
It's called Freedom from Torture. We work with survivors of torture. I just very quickly wanted
If you would, because I'm out of time.
pick up on the point of volunteers. So the majority of people in my team, which I lead, are volunteers, and we treat them the same as people who are paid from the point of view of the checks, the support, and that is really important. So I just wanted to...
I know, that's absolutely true. Exactly right.
It's right, and you'll be increasingly right, I think, and thank you for that. Okay, well, have you enjoyed the evening? I don't know where the time's gone. I've overrun by 15 minutes. I've had a fantastically interesting evening talking to someone who is a fantastically interesting person. Can we say thank you very much?